So a poll or a survey is a great way to collect information on a small group of people that might give you information then about a much larger population or group of people that you're interested in. Um, Let me give you some examples of polls or surveys that I've seen recently. So I'm going to minimize myself here. Here's one, Biden for president. Are you voting for Joe Biden? Yes or no. So notice the site that this is on is joebiden.com or sharejoebiden.com. This one on Trump Pence or action.donaldjtrump.com. How would you rate President Trump's job performance so far? Great, good, okay, or other. Uh, go.joebiden.com. Has Donald Trump abused his power? Yes or no. Notice the wording of the question. And this is on donaldjtrump.com. A series of questions where your choice is President Trump or a radical socialist Democrat, a lying Democrat, high tax, sleazy, lying, low energy, low IQ Democrat, and so on. So the thing that these polls have in common is they do not give you information on anything. These are called voluntary sample polls, and they're pulling from a group of people. The people who actually take that poll are not representative of the entire population, and that's important. So that may be useful for emotional purposes or something, but not for informational understanding about what the entire population feels about a certain issue. Now, luckily, there are some polls that do give us something like that. So two sites, 538 and Real Clear Politics, both do that. The reason I point this out, 538 tends to be a liberal or left-leaning site, whereas Real Clear Politics would tend more to be, the people who host the site are more right-leaning or conservative. And yet, both of these sites, they make their business, their livelihood on being as accurate as possible. So even though they may have personal tendencies and some of the articles they feature may be in one direction or another, the polls and their overall methodology of putting all these different polls together is going to be relatively low bias because they want to be right. They have that personal desire for being accurate. So these polls do tend to be more representative of the population. Just to point out a couple of things here, and then we'll look at it more in this this week. But we have the date of the poll, which is very important in a political poll, less so in some random issue. Sample size, which is important. The bigger the sample, the better it gives you information. However, the randomness is much more important than the size of the sample. I'd take a random sample of 1,000 over a voluntary response sample of 2 million any day, no question. The randomness is really important. The RV is registered voters, or LV is likely voters, which is also important, the distinction between those. And then we have a best guess scenario. So for a given poll here, let's take the Economist poll. Based on these 1,244 people, we think 47% of the country, now it's talking about registered voters across the country now, would vote for Biden if the election was held at that time, or 40% would vote for Trump. In other words, the portion voting for Biden would be 7% higher than the portion voting for Trump. But that's based on that specific sample, on these 1,244 people. We know that the actual truth might be a little bit lower, a little bit higher than that. So we build in what's called a margin of error, and that's represented right here. And sometimes you'll just see plus minus. You might say 47% for Biden plus minus 3.2%. So if we subtract 3.2, we'd get like 43.8. Add 3.2, we get 50.2. We're pretty confident that the actual portion who would vote for Biden if the election had been held that day would be between 43.8% and 50.2%, and a similar thing for Trump. So there's a little bit of leeway, and we'll talk about how to build those confidence intervals, find that margin of error. But the point I want to make now is that these are much higher quality polls because they are based on random samples. And there's some very big issues with these polls too that we'll take a look at later. But that's the difference between voluntary samples and random or representative samples in general.